Have you ever experienced the sensation that your identity feels like a performance you can no longer maintain, as though the version of yourself that others expect is falling apart? Yet something deep within whispers, this is necessary. What if your ego's dissolution isn't your destruction, but rather the emergence of something far more authentic? Something your nervous system has been craving and your soul has quietly arranged. Here is what rarely gets discussed. Your ego wasn't designed for happiness. It was designed for survival. That is precisely why ego death, though frightening, can feel like finally releasing a breath you've been holding your entire life. But what truly occurs in your brain and consciousness following ego death? And how did Carl Jung describe this phenomenon long before neuroscience validated it? Keep watching, because you'll discover not only what ego death does to your neural pathways, but why it might be exactly what your mental well-being requires, and why the aspect of you resisting this transformation is simultaneously the part yearning for it. We exist in a culture where ego gets mentioned constantly. Someone's egotistical, release your ego. But what is it actually from a psychological standpoint? Your ego represents the identity you've assembled to navigate society. It is the self you believe yourself to be. It comprises narratives, classifications, childhood patterns, and social facades. Most of it developed without your awareness or consent. Carl Jung termed this the persona, the public face we present in. Beneath that facade, he explained, exists the shadow. Every aspect of yourself you've rejected to gain acceptance, validation, or security. Your ego grips that facade as if it is keeping you alive, because from its perspective, it is. Now here is the fascinating part. According to fMRI research on meditation and psychedelic substances, published in journals including Nature and Frontiers in Human Neuroscience, when subjects experience ego dissolution, measurable brain changes occur. The default mode network, the DMN, which governs self-referential thinking and your internal narrator, shows dramatically reduced activity. This identical network shows hyperactivity in individuals with anxiety and depression. It generates thoughts like, I'm inadequate, what if I'm rejected, or I must maintain control. When your ego starts dissolving, whether through intensive meditation, breathwork, psychedelic journeys, or spiritual emergence, it transcends philosophical transformation. It becomes a neurological occurrence, and that neurological unraveling feels catastrophic because your brain equates identity with survival. When the facade begins crumbling, your nervous system responds with alarm. It resembles death, but it isn't. It is the death of an inauthentic self. What follows ego death? Once that psychological facade vanishes, does your brain permanently restructure itself? Can ego death genuinely resolve trauma? And how did Carl Jung articulate this rebirth decades before neuroscience could explain it? That is what we'll examine next. But first, if you're someone passionate about expanding consciousness and exploring life's deeper dimensions, subscribe to Fractal Wisdom so you never miss content that challenges your perceived limitations. Stay until the conclusion, because later we'll reveal practical approaches to safely navigate ego death and utilize its potential for healing, creativity, and spiritual development. You've just experienced what feels like a psychological earthquake. Your ego, that voice constantly needing to control the narrative, has quieted, perhaps disappeared entirely. You're uncertain whether you're liberated or unraveling. But here is the paradox neuroscience now confirms. When your ego dissolves, your brain doesn't fracture, it begins healing. What happens afterward might explain why countless people report profound tranquility, clarity, and even bliss following ego death, because underneath your identity's noise exists a deeper intelligence awaiting emergence. When the default mode network quiets, whether through meditation, psychedelics, near-death experiences, or intensive breathwork, something else activates. Neural connectivity across brain regions increases substantially. Researchers at Imperial College London call this entropic brain activity. Essentially, your brain establishes connections it ordinarily wouldn't, like orchestra instruments, suddenly improvising together for the first time. Your sense of self becomes more flexible, more expansive. You begin recognizing that perhaps you're not merely your thoughts, perhaps you're the awareness observing them. Research published in Frontiers in Psychology demonstrated that more intense ego dissolution experiences correlate with greater long-term reductions in depression and anxiety. Consider that carefully. It is as though the brain undergoes a reset. Carl Jung would have described this as encountering the self-capital S, the larger, wiser dimension of your psyche, obscured by ego-driven fear programming. This isn't merely mystical language. Genuine biological transformation occurs here. Studies of experienced meditators and psilocybin therapy participants show increased prefrontal cortex activity, the brain region governing empathy, insight, and emotional regulation. Simultaneously, amygdala activity decreases, the structure processing fear and threat, meaning post-ego death, the brain becomes less reactive and more contemplative. You're less trapped in patterns, like I'm inadequate or they'll criticize me, and more present to what actually exists, not what your mind fabricates. This sounds transformative, but here is the frightening question rarely addressed. If you dissolve the ego, what remains? Who are you without the narratives? The identity, the accomplishments, the suffering you've clutched? Is there danger in losing yourself excessively? Can you venture too far without returning? That is where Carl Jung's insights become essential, because he cautioned that dismantling the ego without integration could prove as hazardous as never confronting it. What does integration look like? How do you reconstruct an identity aligned with your authentic self, not your trauma or conditioning? That is our next exploration. We'll discover how Carl Jung's individuation concept provides the missing connection modern neuroscience is only beginning to map, and how you can develop a wiser, more compassionate sense of self after ego death. This section is critical because transformation without grounding resembles chaos. And if you felt disoriented during spiritual awakening or mental health journeys, this might provide clarity. The ego has unraveled, the facade has fallen, you've glimpsed deeper truth beneath the chaos, and perhaps for the first time, you're uncertain who you truly are. This can terrify, not because it is harmful, but because it is unfamiliar. Like awakening in your lifelong home, suddenly noticing every wall painted differently and doors relocated. The question becomes, now what? If the ego was never your true self, yet helped you survive, how do you return to the world after ego death? Not as your former self, but as something more complete, more aligned, more vital. Carl Jung called this journey individuation, and understanding it may distinguish healing from fragmentation. Carl Jung wasn't simply a psychologist. He was a mystic with scientific rigor. He believed the human psyche isn't inherently broken, but layered. When we peel back those layers, we don't discover emptiness. We discover meaning. He described individuation as becoming your authentic self, not the self others expect, not the persona pleasing everyone, but the self that is whole shadow and light, conscious and unconscious, all aspects integrated. This journey often begins after ego death, because only then are we compelled to ask, who am I really? That is not rhetorical. It is an invitation to rebuild, not the ego as it was, but as it can become, a healthy bridge between your inner world and external version that honors the soul, not just fear. From a neuroscientific perspective, this rebuilding phase involves neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to rewire itself through new experiences. After ego death, neural patterns that operated automatically, patterns shaped by trauma, social roles, or outdated beliefs, get disrupted. And within that disruption, new patterns can form, supporting the process through mindfulness, therapy, creative practices, or spiritual reflection can literally reshape how your brain processes identity, emotion, and connection. This explains why post-ego death periods often bring heightened intuition, increased empathy, reduced thought identification, meaning seeking, and deeper connection to creativity and the unconscious. But ignoring or suppressing this phase, attempting premature normalcy, can lead to existential confusion, derealization, or spiritual bypassing. That is why Jung emphasized integration. You've seen behind the curtain. You cannot unsee it, but you can construct a new way of being that incorporates what you've learned rather than avoiding it. Here is the revelation. Jung believed the self, your deepest essence, desires this wholeness. It is summoning you toward it, often through the exact breakdowns you thought were destroying your life. Panic attacks, burnout, creative blocks, identity crises. What if those weren't failures, but invitations? What if your ego didn't die because you were broken, but because you were finally prepared to awaken? How do you integrate this awakening? How do you live after ego death, having seen that old rules don't apply and new ones aren't yet written? That is our next exploration. We'll examine tools supported by psychology and neuroscience that help rewire your nervous system, reconnect with your body, and rebuild a life aligned with your higher self, because this journey doesn't conclude with ego death. That is merely the beginning. What follows is the genuine adventure. You've confronted the dissolution of everything you believed yourself to be. You've tasted the raw, overwhelming stillness following ego dissolution. But you cannot remain in that void. Integration isn't optional. It is the distinction between awakening and losing sanity. While ego death might feel like an ending, what follows is actually rebirth. But rebirth requires care, intentional practices supporting your nervous system, mind and soul as they reorganize around a new existence. Here are 4 powerful integration tools. Tool 1, somatic grounding, healing through embodiment. Understand this first. Trauma doesn't reside in thoughts. It lives in you. That is why merely understanding your spiritual awakening or ego death often doesn't provide relief. Your body feels overwhelmed, unsafe, dysregulated. We must provide what it needs: movement, expression, discharge. This is somatic grounding. Your body is designed to complete stress cycles, but modern culture teaches suppression. Stay still, appear calm, be polite. But in nature, animals shake after trauma. They tremble, stretch, vocalize, they release, and we can too. Try intuitive movement or ecstatic dance. Move as if your body is communicating. Shake for 2 to 3 minutes, literally shake everything loose. Breathwork like Wim Hof or box breathing to re-regulate your vagus nerve. Trampoline, jumping, cold exposure, ice baths or cold showers reset your system. Stretching with sound, groan, sigh, hum, release trapped energy, chanting or toning. Vocal vibrations stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system, walking barefoot in nature, hitting pillows, visiting rage rooms. Yes, that counts too. These work because your nervous system communicates through sensation, not logic. By allowing your body to physically complete stress cycles, you're signaling your brain, we're safe now. Only then can genuine rebuilding begin. Tool 2, shadow work journaling, allowing the unseen to speak. You might be tempted to remain in light now that you've seen through the ego. But authentic growth means confronting what still hides in darkness. That is shadow work. Jung taught that the shadow contains everything you reject or repress. Your jealousy, control issues, shame, desires. But those aspects aren't evil. They're misunderstood. Until you acknowledge them, they'll unconsciously control your life. What is this resentment protecting? What discomforts me in others that I haven't owned in myself? What emotion have I avoided feeling this week? If journaling feels difficult, don't force it. Some of us are more verbal. Try voice recording your thoughts instead. Simply speak them aloud as if conversing with your inner world. The goal isn't fixing anything, it is witnessing it. Because what you can name, you can integrate. What you avoid strengthens in darkness. Tool 3, archetypal awareness, meeting your inner caste. This is powerful and often overlooked. Carl Jung believed your psyche comprises archetypes, universal energies or patterns appearing in every culture, myth and dream. These aren't merely stories, they're living forces within you. After ego death, these archetypes often emerge more clearly because the ego no longer suppresses them. You might feel the sudden rise of the inner child craving protection or play, the warrior pushing you to reclaim power, the mystic asking you to trust the unknown, the caregiver urging you to soften and serve, the trickster tempting self-sabotage or laughing at absurdity, the sage whispering truths in stillness. Instead of resisting them, dialogue with these inner energies. Ask yourself which archetype is dominant today. What does it need? What truth is it revealing? When you understand you're not one static self but an evolving cast of inner characters, life becomes more spacious and self-compassion becomes easier. Tool 4, conscious connection, healing through safe human mirrors. After ego death, your inner world is wide open. You're raw, redefined, and more perceptive than ever, but also more vulnerable. That is why conscious connection is among the most overlooked, yet powerful integration tools. Here is the paradox. Ego death often leads to solitude. But healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in relationship. That is because our nervous systems co-regulate. Around safe, attuned, grounded people, our bodies begin mirroring that stability. In neuroscience, this connects to polyvagal theory, especially the ventral vagal state supporting calm connection and social engagement. The right relationships can literally help rewire your nervous system after ego death. This isn't about sharing your revelations with anyone who'll listen. It is about choosing intentional spaces where your emerging self can be seen, accepted, and compassionately mirrored back. Here are some approaches: open-hearted conversations with someone who understands, not to fix you, but to witness you. Conscious community spaces like support circles, integration groups, spiritual sanghas, or therapeutic circles. Working with a trauma-informed coach, guide, or therapist familiar with awakening. Even just having one person you can text saying, "I feel different, can I share what is happening?" Because when your ego dissolves, it can feel like nobody sees you anymore. not even yourself. But being held in loving connection reminds you you're not disappearing, you're emerging and being met by another human while you're still forming. That is medicine. If you've experienced ego death or even glimpses of it, you're not broken. You're in a sacred in-between, and it is acceptable to not have all answers right now. What matters most is this: you don't have to return to who you were. You get to rebuild with intention, with truth, and with gentleness. These tools aren't just practices, they're lifelines back to your body, your intuition, your authentic self. I want to hear from you. What is one aspect of your ego you've had to release lately? Or perhaps you're in it right now, between narratives, between identities, between who you were and who you're becoming. This is a space for genuine conversation, no facades needed. If you found this video healing or illuminating, subscribe to Fractal Wisdom. This channel exists to support your expansion, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, with tools that meet you where you are. More is coming, and you won't want to miss what is next. You're not alone on this path. We're walking it together.